The Denver Broncos have already spent big in NFL free agency, but diamonds in the rough might be up next. What are some reclamation projects that Sean Payton and George Payton could look for in NFL free agency to boost this roster even further? We're going to discuss that in a special episode today, Locked On Broncos with Ryan Edwards.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, thanks so much for joining the episode today. We appreciate you so much, especially those of you who are everyday listeners of the show. Thanks for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate every single one of you. Today, we're going to be talking about reclamation projects the Denver Broncos could look at in NFL free agency. Do any guys make sense offensively, defensively? And of course, we have a special guest co-host here today, Ryan Edwards, who's going to be taking us through his top three picks in the 2025 NFL draft, which is fast approaching, and really excited to have Ryan here. If you're a first-time listener of the show, you know it's usually your boys, Cody and Sayre, but Ryan is an absolute legend in Denver Broncos media right now. One of the best guys, I think, just in general, Ryan, just to compliment you and to build you up here a little bit. I know the listeners listen to you. Obviously, everybody knows who you are, but just truly one of the most genuine guys reaching out to encourage. And so thanks so much for being on the show today and being willing to kind of put on your GM hat with me.
Hey, man, that's what we get to do as sports fans, as Broncos fans. We all get to play GM every single day, especially on Twitter, and that's always a lot of fun. But no, man, I'm a big fan of both you and Cody. Love what you guys do on Locked On. I was truly honored that you reached out.
Heck yeah, it's going to be awesome. And like I said, we're going to be talking about reclamation projects today. But before we talk about that, got to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Ryan, when it comes to reclamation projects, I thought Sean Payton had a funny quote last year when he was talking about Zach Wilson and, you know, some of the quarterbacks. Well, really, a couple of the quarterbacks that he had on the team last year, he called them orphan dogs, you know, and really wanting to help elevate their value. I feel personally like the Broncos have built an environment under Sean Payton where they might be more inclined toward the reclamation projects now as opposed to a couple of years ago when they're building culture. So let's talk about the offensive side of the ball here for a bit. Any position offensively, is there anybody out there, former high draft pick, anything like that, that you feel would be a good reclamation project for the Broncos to take a shot on here in NFL free agency?
Yeah, and I think it's a combination, right? You're talking about what Sean Payton said there and then what George Payton has done. And one of the strengths, I think, that he has been able to mine talent, whether it was free agency, getting on these one-year contracts like last year with Cody Barton and Justin Strnad late in the process, or getting college free agents like Jaquan McMillan. You know, I mean, that's so valuable to your team to be able to sort of fill the gaps with these kind of players that a lot of teams maybe overlook or decide to move on from. And then you bring them in, and lo and behold, they're a big-time contributor for you. I mean, Alex Singleton was a one-year contract guy, and look what he ended up turning into as a starting caliber inside linebacker. So on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, I think you sort of have to start at running back because that's the one position that seems to be the biggest glaring hole. And as you approach the draft, you'd like to not be desperate to have to take a running back at the top of the draft, though. There's one at 20 that would probably be available. I think most Broncos fans want. But you know, J.K. Dobbins' name keeps coming up, and I honestly don't know why he's still out there considering the year he had. He signed a relatively vet minimum contract with the Chargers last year, put up over 1,000 all-purpose yards, was truly looked like vintage J.K. Dobbins, looked like he was back. I know he missed a little bit of time there in December because of a knee injury, but the fact is he still came back. He looks like he's relatively healthy. He's still pretty young. I think he's like 26 years old. So for me, and I don't even know if it goes full reclamation, but I think you can get him on a one-year contract. And if you're getting J.K. Dobbins on a one-year contract, it gives you some flexibility in that running back room. It gives you some options there to a guy that also can catch passes out of the backfield, but also really does run tough between the tackles. You know, you're starting to see some of the running backs come off the board, but the contracts have not been overwhelming, like not at all. So I sort of feel like you're not in a position where you're jumping into the market and you're going to have to offer a lot to get him. So for me, that would be one of my top ones. I would kick the tires on Nick Chubb, like just throwing that out there, because we had Shelby Harris in studio and he just raved about his leadership. And you think on the offensive side of the ball, your leadership really is on your offensive line, but with the skill position players other than Cortland Sutton, it's a lot of youth. So I wouldn't really hate having him in the room and understanding that he's in a running back by committee, and that's best way to use him. But yeah, for me, I'd start with the running backs. What about you?
I really love the idea of Nick Chubb there. I've come around on the J.K. Dobbins idea, especially because, like you said, he's not a full-on reclamation project based on the fact that last year there's proof of concept that he can still play. Like, I think a lot of people questioned the Chargers bringing him in. Like, what's he really going to do for you? How many games is he actually going to give you? And like you said, gave them over 1,000 all-purpose yards. With somebody like Nick Chubb, I wonder if, based on your conversations with Shelby Harris, is that a type of thing to where, I hate to always go back to this because it can seem like such hyperbole, things like that, but young guys in the NFL, I don't think it can be overstated how important those veteran voices are at times, like with Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. Like, that was tender time in Von's career to be able to have that mentor around him to show him how to be a pro. Is that something that there's only so far coaching can go, right? When it comes to Sean Payton and his staff's experience, I think that's partly why he's bringing in some former players too. But a guy like Nick Chubb could really help elevate a lot of players in that Denver offense, regardless of if they're wide receivers, tight ends, just because he's going to show everybody how to come in and be a pro.
I think that's exactly right. And so say you take Nick Chubb, you bring him in, it's a 1-year contract. He understands that he's trying to work his way back. And then you draft Omarion Hampton. And think about having Nick Chubb and Omarion Hampton and really having Omarion being able to learn how to be a pro from Nick Chubb. I don't see a downside in that. I know some people would say, oh, I don't know if he has much left in the tank. Okay, well, it's a 1-year contract. And honestly, if everything works out right anyways, Omarion's going to be your starter, and you're going to have a couple of change of pace guys anyways. It's good to have options. It's good to have options going into training camp. And once again, if he's signing for relatively vet men or even a $2 million contract, or you do a 2-year deal where he gets maybe 2.5 guaranteed with incentives, I sort of think that there's really no downside in that scenario. And once again, like I said, it's another leadership voice in the locker room. And like I said, Shelby described it when he came back last year. Even though they all could see he wasn't quite back to his normal self, it gave the team such a lift because of what he represented to that organization and that team. So that would be a guy. Another one I just throw out very quickly if you're going to go receiver. And again, it doesn't sound like the Broncos have been very heavy on the receiver, but I've heard nothing but great things about Tyler Lockett as another sort of leadership guy. Now, he's on the older side, so it is kind of more in that reclamation area. Very productive player, though. And even though he's had a few dings here and there, he tends to play through a lot of that. He may not have the full straight line speed that he used to, but he's still pretty fast. And in my opinion, anytime you're adding speed to the team, you're really not doing anything wrong. If Marvin Mims may continue to share time on special teams, I think you're going to want to have another speed option out there on the field.
I like that pick as well. We haven't talked a ton about Tyler Lockett on this show, but I do think that he's a name worth watching the deeper that we get into the offseason. Another one, I guess we talk about a few former Browns here. How about Elijah Moore? What are your thoughts on him? Yeah. I mean, he kind of was, I think they kind of tried to force feed him in Cleveland a little bit too much. And he had a huge game against Denver last year. But then again, I think the water boy could have come in potentially and had a huge game in that Cleveland game. What are your thoughts on Elijah Moore as somebody like, do you think he's maybe still got that untapped potential that Cleveland thought they could get out of him?
I like the traits, right? I mean, the speed is certainly there. He looks like he should be a dynamic wide receiver. Personality is my only question with Elijah Moore and his fit with this locker room. That's the only stuff that's ever come up about Elijah Moore and whether or not he would be a fit. And I think you are thinking culture fit. And so the reason why I started with a couple of guys is because I know for a fact those are great culture guys. Tyler Lockett and Nick Chubb are great culture guys. And Elijah Moore, that's the one question I'd have about him is I'd want to vet that, and I'd want to be able to talk to some people about him and find out, okay, is this a guy that really kind of fits with what we're trying to do? Because Sean Payton made a point when he got here to sort of clear out a bit of the culture that had kind of plagued this team with losses. I'm not saying those guys were losers or anything. I'm just saying
Mm-hmm.
that there was a certain mindset in that locker room. Sean Payton had to sort of help move some of those guys along. That way he could bring in some fresh ideas, some fresh perspective, and some guys that really weren't so accustomed to losing. Elijah Moore, unfortunately, has done a lot of losing over his time. Plus, again, I've understood that there's some things about his personality that may not fit.
Very, very interesting. You have to have buy-in from everybody that's coming into the organization, and the Denver Broncos trying to build a winner. So they've got to get the right people in the building, not just the highest overall players on Madden, right? Obviously. And so free agency, it's all about risk. It's all about potential reward. And that's exactly what we're talking about on today's episode. But after looking at a couple of offensive players who could be interesting risk reward propositions, what about on the defensive side of the ball? We're going to talk about that coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. And can you imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, witnessing unforgettable moments? There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. And you don't have to imagine it, because getting tickets, it shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime is coming in to hook you, the ultimate fan, up. And it's easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Gametime Picks makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever it is that you're interested in going to. And you can check out the Gametime app for matchups coming up in your area, events coming up in your area. You're always going to get the lowest price guarantee, as well as peace of mind with seat views before you buy, no surprise feed, lowest price guaranteed. Look, you can book with total confidence. And so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's Locked On, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You just never know when you take a risk on somebody in NFL free agency. You might be getting the next Zach Bond, who finished in the top 5 of the Defensive Player of the Year voting. That's why taking calculated risks is important, and that's exactly what we're talking about on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, with me, obviously, but Ryan Edwards. You usually see Cody Roark in the other seat, but Ryan Edwards is here. We're honored and privileged to have you here, Ryan, and I think I speak for all the listeners when I say thank you for what you do, and thank you to all the listeners as well for making us your first listen of the day every single day here at Locked On Broncos. And let's talk about defensive side of the ball, because the inspiration for this kind of a subject is obviously a guy like Zach Bond, Ryan, where you sign a guy to a relatively low risk deal in free agency. You say, hey, at worst, he can come in and help our special teams, right? But I guess you never know when somebody can potentially emerge, and the fit, like you mentioned in the previous segment, that culture fit is just perfect. Defensively, is there anybody that you kind of have your eye on as, hey, this guy could be interesting, maybe the Broncos should take a shot on him?
You know, it's such a good question, because it feels like there aren't really a lot of glaring holes on the defensive side of the ball with the addition of Hufanga and Greenlaw, and of course signing back DJ Jones. But if there's one position that I would probably want to take a look at, maybe a vet, would be at cornerback. I think you could never have too much depth there. James Bradbury still sort of hanging out there. Stephon Gilmore, another name that's just sort of out there. Chidobe Awuzie, former CU standout, played with the Titans. I would sort of kick the tires on those guys. And again, it's not to say that, hey, Riley Moss is not going to be my starter. I still think you lean that direction. But I think that, you know, you bring in a vet, you give yourself a little bit of a hedge there, because Riley Moss was able to do it for the majority of a year. But when he got hurt, he came back. He obviously wasn't quite the same player. It's also to say that what if 1 year, that was a 1 year wonder in some respects, right? Maybe year 2 or year 3 in this case for him, he doesn't quite perform at that level. Then all of a sudden that is a massive hole in your defense, because you obviously have to have somebody really strong at the opposite side of Pat Surtain. And again, you need some options maybe at nickel too. I think there were some times, maybe it's not all his fault, but Jaquan McMillan had a couple of rough patches in there too. So I think that it's not a glaring hole right now, but having a vet presence there would be something I'd be intrigued by.
That is really interesting, especially because, like you said, I mean, I think we do have to be critical of Riley Moss's finish to last season, as good as the before the injury was, even up to the point that he got hurt in that Raiders game. I think it's fair to say that the lapses down the stretch defensively, and there was a lot of dirty hands there, nearly cost the Broncos their shot at making the playoffs for the first time since Super Bowl 50. Last offseason, the Broncos did try to sign Christian Fulton, who I believe signed with the Chiefs this year. Here's a name I want to throw at you and get your reaction to this. The Broncos already have one legacy guy, right? Pat Surtain. His dad obviously was great in the NFL. What about Asante Samuel Jr., who I think is still a free agent, unless as of the time we're recording, he just signed somewhere. He played for a division rival, had some injuries, obviously the inconsistency, but you feel like you've obviously got a great defensive backs coach in Jim Leonard who can elevate those guys. What do you think about Asante Samuel Jr. as a possible reclamation project?
Yeah, I like him. I've heard nothing but good things, but you're also right. It is totally in that reclamation project kind of range. And once again, when you get to a certain age in the league, you start to worry about their straight line speed, their quicks, and if they can hang in there. I think Asante Samuel still can play in this league. And again, we're at that point in free agency where a lot of these guys are going to be signing 1-2 year contracts because they didn't quite get the market that they were looking for in the first wave, maybe even in the second wave. And now they're thinking, you know what, cap's going to go up again next year. I'm going to go in. And in this case, the Broncos are an attractive destination, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So go in, play opposite Pat Surtain, maybe have a really good bounce back year, and I can hit free agency next year and get a much better contract. I think most players at this point are thinking along those lines, and that's what their agents are advising them. Hey, don't stress about it. We didn't get what we wanted this year. Go play somewhere, ball out, go play with a contender. The Broncos are absolutely a contender this year. So put yourself in that position and see what you can make of it, and then you'll hit free agency next year. So I like that one.
Yeah, that would be an interesting situation. And you mentioned the Broncos being a destination team. Let's kind of pivot into that realm for just a second here, because a report recently came out that Dre Greenlaw was getting called by the 49ers amidst his agreement, or after his agreement with the Denver Broncos. I think that speaks not only to the fact that Broncos Country should be excited that he's probably fully healthy at this point, or is expected to be fully healthy in the near future, but talk about that and what you're hearing, what your perception is as far as the Broncos being a destination team again, because I think for fans want to believe that. I want to believe that, but I don't know it for a fact. But I feel like we're seeing the evidence of it. So let's speak into that for a second. The Broncos being a destination team again.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the report is that from Adam Schefter that the 49ers, once they heard that he agreed to a contract with the Broncos, because it was in the legal tampering period and contracts are not official, the 49ers tried to convince him to stay. And that would have been an interesting world to live in for a moment, because certainly for the Broncos, John Lynch is a Ring of Famer. And again, it's the business of the NFL, so I guess at some level you just sort of accept that that's part of it. I know Randy Gregory ended up coming here after there was a tacit agreement down there in Dallas, though there was still some haggling over the contract details, so it wasn't exactly the same. But in this case, Greenlaw agreed to it, and it would have been fascinating to live in a world where the Broncos didn't get Dre Greenlaw, and now they have a pretty significant hole there at inside linebacker. But he chose the Broncos. He had an opportunity to go back to the 49ers. The success that they've had over the last several years, the 2 Super Bowl trips that he's been a part of, he said, no, I'd rather go to the Denver Broncos. I'd rather go play with that defense on that team, because they clearly are an ascending team. And yeah, I mean, I think proof of concept is everything. And showing proof of concept to the rest of the league last year, we knew that we hoped that it might pay dividends into free agency this year, and certainly it has. You nailed 2 of the top defensive players that you could have acquired. You had to hold safety, you had to hold inside linebacker. You were able to bring back DJ Jones. That was a great start. And then Evan Ingram, he came here first. Like that, I mean, whatever you want to spin about him leaving the building, going to the Chargers for a minute, that's fine. The Broncos offered him similar money, and he chose the Broncos. He came here first because he knew this was a destination, and I think the rest of the league is starting to catch up to that idea.
Dare I say the Denver Broncos are more than officially back. There's also reports that Deebo Samuel was interested in being traded to Denver. Potentially Cooper Kupp had interest in coming to Denver on the player side of things, which is really cool to think about. So, hey, Bo Nix effect, I suppose, Ryan, is taking place here. I really love that aspect of NFL free agency and the entire offseason in general, and what makes the 2025 NFL draft as exciting as can possibly be is that the Broncos are building around a franchise quarterback. So I'm going to get Ryan Edwards' top 3 ideal picks for the Denver Broncos in the 2025 draft coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
We are putting Ryan Edwards in charge of building the top 3 ideal picks of the Denver Broncos here in the 2025 NFL draft. As we jump into the fourth quarter of the show, though, mile high salute to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. We appreciate all you everyday listeners so much. And Ryan, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this because I know you love the NFL draft. I know you love the offseason. It's one of the things we've consistently bonded over, and it's certainly the listeners of our shows respectively. I think it's one of the busiest times of the year for all of us because it's so fun to speculate on what could be. Now, I want to hear from you. You're George Payton right now. You're in, well, it's George and Sean. You're putting on 2 hats here. I want to know from you, what's the top 3 ideal picks for the Denver Broncos in the 2025 draft?
Well, thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be George and Sean at the same time. There's no conflict whatsoever. We get along great. For all the people out there that want to continue to say that
Right.
Sean's in charge and George is just happy to be there, it's not the case. But yeah, listen, I will tell you my 3 picks, but I will say, to preface it, I think the first pick, there's a lot of directions you can go, and I don't think there's really a wrong answer here. So we're sitting in the now. We're sitting in a world where they don't have a running back in free agency, and we just have that running back room. So I'm going to take Omarion Hampton pretty easily there at pick number 20. It's not to say that I won't consider D-line. There's certainly some players that I like in that range. I think I think Walter Nolan's a guy that I've been a huge fan. Kenneth Grant is another guy that I'm a huge fan of. I think building through the trenches is always a good thing, but in this case, it's a pretty glaring hole, and I do think that there's an argument that he should be in the same tier as Ashton Janney when it comes to running backs in this draft. It's a great draft for running backs, and I'd even look at taking another one in day 3. But as I'm sitting there at pick number 20, I can't help myself. I think he's a starting caliber 3-down back day 1, and we got better. If we had him, we got better. We get to the second round. That's probably where I'm going to take a look at see what the tight ends are doing. I think I might be able to wait to the third there, but I'm going to say if we get to the second round and say Alfred Collins is sitting there, interior defensive lineman out of Texas, I think I'm probably looking at him. I really like him a lot. So if I don't go D-line in the first round, I'm probably looking at the trenches in the second round because I think that there's a bit of a drop-off after that. And then I'm going to address my tight end in the third. I'm looking at Mason Taylor out of LSU. I'm looking at Terrence Ferguson. I might be able to wait on Terrence Ferguson or Gunnar Helm until day 3, but I love Mason Taylor. If you watched his gauntlet at the NFL Combine, that is one of the coolest football, geek out moments. If you just like football, that's pretty much gold right there. So my top 3 picks will be Omarion Hampton, Alfred Collins, and Mason Taylor.
I absolutely love it. I think if Hampton becomes a Denver Bronco, I think even the stingiest of those who have been handing out backhanded compliments, as you and I have fought the great fight over the course of the last year amongst the national media, I think even those folks would start to be like, all right, the Broncos might be for real with this guy in the fold. That might be the missing piece offensively. And yeah, you don't, like you said, you can go into the NFL draft this year with an extremely open mind in round 1, but being able to get a playmaker like that, I mean, we saw what difference it made for the Packers to have Josh Jacobs, what difference it made for the Ravens to have Derrick Henry, and obviously the Eagles with Saquon Barkley. Not to put that kind of pressure on a first round rookie, but that's the type of impact that newcomer backs are having around the league. Let's speak to this idea of a D lineman early for the Denver Broncos? Because a lot of folks might be saying, well, what the heck? Like the Broncos, didn't Sean Payton and George Payton just say that D-line was one of the top 2 units on the team last year? What do you think it is about the defensive line that the team needs to go with a premium selection at that position group?
Well, I'm going to look at the parity of what the Eagles have been doing, right? I mean, that's number one right there is you continue to load up in the trenches, especially in the first round. And as guys start to age out, or maybe there's injuries, it's a rotating position. Simply put, you want to be able to rotate guys in there. I always crack up when people put out, well, this guy only played 46% of the snaps. I'm like, that's exactly what you want. If you have a deep room, then you have an opportunity to cycle those guys out and they stay fresh throughout the entirety of the game. And then you're good against the run, you're good against the pass, and you're not exhausting any one of them. I do think they're going to extend Zach Allen. I think they're going to extend Nick Bonito. This isn't any kind of indication of any of those kinds of things. It's just an acknowledgement that it's good to load up at that position. And maybe you can't afford everyone. So JFM, for example, who's been very public about how he wants a new contract. Well, I mean, you'd like to be able to keep him. Certainly, he's very valuable, but maybe adding a premium defensive lineman gives you a little bit of leverage in that conversation. So I just think that it gives you so many options there. Look, we could even have the conversation about the offensive line. After this year, you could look and move on from Ben Powers and get a little bit more affordable there at offensive guard. We're banking on Luke Wattenberg being the starting caliber center that he showed at times last year, but that's also a position that you could potentially look at if you're going a true trenches conversation. I'm not saying do that at your first pick, but again, you understand that continuing to add at those positions tends to work out better for most teams involved.
Now, at 20 overall, you might be able to get the best interior lineman on your board offensively, potentially. Well, in this year's kind of a draft. So, is there a position in round 1 that you'd go on the air after the first round and you'd be like, I honestly don't know what they were doing there, like outside of quarterback or special teams guys?
Right.
Is there a position that you would be like, I don't know why? Like, why did they do this? And it might not be a specific player, but maybe a specific position.
Yeah, it'd probably be like offensive tackle or something along those lines. And again, it's not to say that I couldn't sort of talk myself into the long view of that. It's just to understand, like, if you're a team that you think you're in a contending window right now, adding a player that maybe is more like a 2 to 3 year out from playing for you, unless you view him as a versatile guy that can play interior. But I still think you can find those guys into day 2 and day 3 especially. So I would be a little surprised at that position, but almost everything else, maybe safety, I guess. Like I'm a big Nick Emenwari fan, but also that might be one where I'm kind of like, okay, well, you added Hufanga. Brandon Jones played great last year for you, so you clearly have some kind of mindset about what his role is, especially because he plays up in the box as well. He's a great coverage linebacker, so they're safety, but can play up in the box like a linebacker. So I think that there'll be a couple positions. How about you? Would there be anything that you would probably be kind of stumped on?
I agree on those two right there. I don't think there's any inside linebacker in particular that I would say, hey, the Broncos take this guy in round 1, because Campbell from Alabama kind of floats positions, right. And he could be, I don't know, redundant in ways with Drew Sanders, although it might be kind of like a redo with Drew Sanders in other ways. So that would really interest me. But yeah, other than that, like you mentioned, D-line, I mean, even wide receiver, running back, tight end, even. And after the Evan Ingram signing, still would not be opposed to Colson Loveland if he's there in round 1 either. So very interested to see what happens there. My last question for you, Ryan, is your vibe from the Denver Broncos side of things. Do you get the impression that the team, like you mentioned, I mean, the perception could be from others on the outside that this team is like back, that they're ready to contend? Are you feeling like George Payton and Sean Payton are having that approach to the offseason? Like, are they taking a, hey, we're in a competitive window approach based on the moves that they've made?
I absolutely believe that. And whether sourcing or just, being around the team as much as I get a chance to be, yes, they absolutely view that. They still have around 32 million, 33 million of the Russ contract. So they had to be a little bit judicious with their spending here in free agency, but they went out and they just sort of attacked the exact positions they needed to. And they said, and I give them credit for this because, sometimes, Sean out there, he kind of gives away the plan, to Kay Adams. He told her basically, hey, we're going to build this thing, from the inside. We're going to be looking at linebacker. We're going to be at the D-line. We're going to look at safety. He told her all those positions. She said, what about a vet wide receiver? And he's like, nah, probably more like a tight end. That's exactly what they did. So I do appreciate the transparency. But the fact is, I think that there's some value to that because you said this is what you're going to do and you accomplished it. And you got guys that can play right away, that can be starters for you, and that made you better. And so if you approached it that way, you accomplished your goals. So whatever they do at free agency, they could be done at this point. And I think most Broncos fans would be pretty amped. I know that the team is amped about adding these players. And then now you look to the draft where you have your first, second, third, fourth, and you got 3 6-round picks. I mean, you could do a lot of damage there. And they've been so good over the last couple of years with George and Sean, with that continuity of the coaching staff, knowing exactly what they're shopping for when they get to the draft. There's just got to be a lot of excitement about what they're going to be able to add. And the fact is, they've been each of these draft classes have had guys that produce in year one. And so, and that's on top of the guys that continue to sort of add. Marvin Mims was Sean Payton's first pick, and he's been nothing but a Pro Bowler and All-Pro as a special teamer. I think most of us would take that, and then they think they can add more to him as a wide receiver in the offense. So, yeah, I get the sense from them they approach this thing with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about what's to come.
And I think that's justified, right? Amongst the fan base, Broncos Country is pumped seeing the moves that are being made in NFL free agency and certainly excited for the NFL draft. And it's so awesome to have people like Ryan in the Broncos media sphere who get us all excited about what's going on every single day. So if you're not already following Ryan on Twitter, by the way, it's probably because you don't have an account, and so that make sure you're already doing that. But Ryan, we really appreciate you coming on today, and Broncos Country obviously will be covering every single bit of news analysis, content coverage, all that good stuff on Locked On Broncos going forward. You can find Ryan over there at 850 KOA. Does great work and has done great work. Obviously, I think the term GOAT gets thrown around a little too loosely these days, Ryan, but truly you are one of the GOATs in Broncos Country and in the NFL media sphere. I can't imagine if every team didn't have a Ryan Edwards, they're missing out. So appreciate all that you do in this arena, and Broncos Country, we appreciate you all so much. We'll catch you on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.